Self-defense. We all know that this case in the state of Texas is a big news story right now, where a black kid stabbed a white kid, and allegedly, we don't know, did the black kid start it, did the white kid start it, did they have some history, is this self-defense, is that justifiable, what's going to happen in court? We don't know anything as of right now, and anything you hear on social media may or may not be true, and people are claiming they know what happened.
When people do the most, I do the analysis. Let's go. This is 17-year-old Karmelo Anthony, a high school track star who's currently facing a possible life sentence behind bars for ending the life of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf, pictured on the right. Also a track star at a competing school. Austin was unarmed at the time when his life was ended by a single stab wound at the hands of Karmelo Anthony. This is 31-year-old Quadajah Johnson, who's also facing a life sentence in prison for ending the life of 31-year-old Romika Blackman, pictured on the right. Romika was unarmed. She was also restrained by an accomplice of Johnson's and shot several times by Quadajah Johnson until she was dead. Today we're going to take a look at both homicide cases that have sparked a lot of public debate throughout this country. The Karmelo Anthony case out of Frisco, Texas, and the Quadajah Johnson case out of Chicago, Illinois. Before we get started, let me go ahead and state the obvious. These are not identical cases. The facts are different. The jurisdictions are different. The evidence is different. But there is one common issue that makes these cases worth discussing side by side. So I'm comparing the Karmelo Anthony and the Quadajah Johnson cases. Both defendants have raised self-defense claims, and in both cases, the central question appears to be whether a person can lawfully use deadly force against an unarmed person when they believe they're in danger of being overpowered during a physical confrontation. First, let's listen briefly to the facts surrounding the Karmelo Anthony case out of Texas.
Trial against Karmelo Anthony begins tomorrow, June 1st, in Collin County, Texas. Karmelo is facing one count of first-degree murder in connection with the death of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf. This case began on April 2nd, 2025 at a Frisco ISD track meet at Kirkendall Stadium. 17-year-old Austin Metcalf was a student athlete from Memorial High School. He was at that track meet with his twin brother Hunter when a confrontation happened in the stands. According to court documents and reporting on this case, Karmelo Anthony was under a team tent area when Austin Metcalf told him he needed to move. According to witnesses, they began arguing. And according to a probable cause affidavit, Karmelo Anthony went into his bag during this confrontation, and then Austin was stabbed once in the chest. He passed away at the scene with his twin brother by his side. Karmelo Anthony was arrested shortly after this happened, and he reportedly told police that he was just defending himself, and he asked if what he had done would be considered self-defense. That self-defense claim is expected to be a large part of this trial.
There were eyewitnesses at the crime scene, and this person tells us what he actually heard being stated at Karmelo's bond hearing. Let's listen in.
Giving us some insight from your point of view, Mr. Anthony. The question I have is, you mentioned earlier that the brother said that they had taken his backpack. Is that accurate? So if that was the case, how was he able to get the poker out of the backpack?
They threw it. They took it.
So they took the poker.
And he went back to retrieve it. And they're coming and they're walking toward him. And he says, "I'm going to punch you in the face inward." And so here comes all this weight at him. So allegedly, I think this will come out. Allegedly, a hand is thrown, and Karmelo is trying to block it. Before this is said, though, he says, "I'm going to punch you in the face." He goes, touch me again and see what happens. Well, he tried to touch him. Karmelo tried to block it. And then a little pokey happened. I shouldn't say a little.
So they grabbed the bag. They threw the bag. Karmelo went to retrieve the bag. Mm-hmm. And that's how he was able to get his hand on the poker.
Right.
Now, I'm not asking y'all to play jury based on that bit of information alone, but I do want you to consider how a person caught up in that moment could believe that they're facing a situation that could result in their own death. One of the biggest misconceptions about self-defense is that a person must be facing a gun or a knife before deadly force can ever be justified. And I'm here to tell you that's not necessarily true. In many states, including Illinois and Texas, the law recognizes that a person can suffer either death or great bodily harm from an unarmed attack under certain circumstances. So the question is not simply whether the other person had a weapon. The question is whether the defendant reasonably believed that they faced an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. That's where these two cases become very interesting and nuanced. Here are the facts surrounding the Quadajah Johnson case for those of you who may be new to my channel. This is Tia Ewing of Fox News reporting, and this is what she had to say.
Quadajah Johnson and Romika Blackman each have a child with witness one in this case. All three parties got into a dispute near a school. Johnson threatened Blackman multiple times in front of witnesses. Johnson then retrieved a handgun, shot Blackman multiple times in front of witnesses. This was filed for the murder charge, the first-degree murder charge. So again, Johnson threatened Blackman multiple times in front of witnesses. Johnson then retrieved a handgun, shot Blackman multiple times in front of witnesses, and then we know, sadly, Blackman died. Johnson murdered Blackman after Blackman had just dropped her child off at school. Johnson celebrated the murder immediately after.
In both cases, supporters of the defendants have argued that their fear was real. Not necessarily fear of being killed immediately, but fear of being physically overwhelmed. Fear of losing control of the situation. Fear of what might happen if the confrontation continued. Fear of a good old fist-to-fist ass whooping. And that raises an important question. Let's listen to what an eyewitness in the Quadajah Johnson case had to say.
I saw them when they were fighting in the beginning, and I was like, this is not right. He was slamming her with the door when she was standing in her door frame, not even close to the female on the other side. So she was literally standing on the other side of the road, and her baby daddy was literally slamming the door on her back. So she went back into her car, came back out, and then this was when the baby daddy walked towards the other baby mama. After this happened, he grabbed her by the waist. She tried to wiggle away from him. Her arm was like literally almost getting free with his arm around her neck this time, because he was holding her by the waist in the beginning and she wiggled out, After this happened, he had her in the almost looking like a headlock to me on the side, and then the other baby mama stated, "I'm gonna shoot you, bitch. Watch me shoot you, bitch." And he stated, she's gonna go get her gun. She's gonna go get her gun. Watch. And after this happened, she ran to the passenger side of her vehicle, grabbed her gun, went around, and when the woman, the mother, who slipped away from him for at least maybe a good second, as soon as she slipped away, she shot her. And she shot her in the face, on her side, and in her thigh.
At what point does fear of losing a fight become fear of serious bodily harm? Because not every fist fight justifies deadly force, and not every physical confrontation creates a legal right to kill. I'm sorry you had to hear that from me. But if that was the case, self-defense would become a blanket excuse for any violent encounter. It could essentially legalize street justice even when the outcome is deadly. But you see, the law requires more than that. Jurors are going to look at factors such as who started the confrontation, who escalated the confrontation, was there an opportunity to disengage, what was the size and strength difference between the individuals involved. We know that the alleged altercation between Quadajah Johnson and Romika Blackman was almost equal in terms of gender, age, and size. Except Quadajah had a partner, an accomplice, if you will, who restrained her victim while she grabbed her firearm from the car and fired multiple shots to ensure that her victim died. The fatal incident took place in broad daylight across the street from an elementary school. We also know that Karmelo Anthony's victim was unarmed, and the victim's brother was present, his twin brother, who was likely to join in on any physical altercation because, well, that's just what siblings do. And it doesn't help that both young men were a bit larger in size than Karmelo, but they both were also unarmed. Because Karmelo used deadly force, we won't ever know how powerful or violent any type of fistfight would have become. This fatal incident, it also took place in broad daylight at a high school track meet where teenage athletes were competing. How quickly did those events unfold? And what evidence exists to support either of the defendants' version of events, Quadajah's or Karmelo's? Those questions are going to matter a lot to a jury because self-defense claims are rarely judged based solely on what a defendant says they felt. They're judged based on whether that fear was objectively reasonable under the circumstances. Would a reasonable person have made that same choice? And that's where evidence becomes critical, y'all. I'm talking about video evidence, witness testimony, forensic evidence, and medical evidence. And also statements made before and after the incident. Karmelo ran. Quadajah remained at the scene and said, "I'm licensed to carry." All of these pieces will help jurors determine whether the use of deadly force was necessary or whether it went beyond what the law allows. People tend to view self-defense as an all or nothing concept. Either somebody was defending themselves or they weren't. But the reality is much more complicated than that. A person might genuinely feel afraid. A person may honestly believe that they're in danger. But a jury can still conclude that the level of force used was not legally justified. On the other hand, a person could use deadly force against an unarmed individual and still successfully establish self-defense if the facts support a reasonable belief that serious bodily harm was imminent. And by imminent, I'm talking about the threat is actively present and the danger is about to happen immediately. In other words, it's not a hypothetical situation. That's why these cases are so fact-specific. It's also why public opinion and legal standards don't always align. Some people will decide where they stand based on emotion, but the law requires a different analysis. The law's going to ask whether the defendant's actions were reasonable under the circumstances that appeared at that moment. Where Karmelo Anthony's trial is underway and jury selection just began. Quadajah Johnson's case is quickly approaching trial, and it could begin before the January 2027 deadline for having all the evidence submitted. Both defendants have been charged with murder in the first degree, and both have claimed self-defense. So when comparing the Karmelo Anthony's case and the Quadajah Johnson case, I think the most valuable discussion is not whether the cases are the same, because we've already established that they're not. The more important discussion is this: how do courts evaluate self-defense claims when the alleged threat is an unarmed person? How much weight should be given to a defendant's fear of being overpowered? And when does fear of losing a fight become a legally recognized fear of death or great bodily harm? Those are the questions that jurors have to answer. And my goal is not to tell you what to think. My goal is always to encourage you to look at the facts. Try to understand the law and think critically about how self-defense claims are evaluated in real-world cases. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who can use this message. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and leave me a message letting me know your thoughts. Do you believe a fear of being overpowered in a fistfight can justify deadly force? And if so, where should the line be drawn? Meet me in the comments. We can continue the conversation there.